Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is the second and final instalment of my Rehaul videos, and if you don't know what I'm referring to, I lost a lot of books to an attack of mould in the shed where they're stored, and so I've invested a couple of bookcases to bring inside in what is a very cramped house and doesn't really have room for all my books. But of the ones I threw away, so my first Rehaul video, and I'll post a link to it, was for the fiction I lost. And when I went to the shed last week to sort of attack the mould and repaint it and everything, I realised the second bookshelf had succumbed in totality. I thought it was only a couple of shelves, but it was the whole thing, and I lost a lot of non-fiction. So again, I can't afford to replace all the titles, and some of them I'm sure are long out of print. Some of these books go back sort of 30, 40 years. Well, not quite 40. So I was sort of quite selective, and this is what we're addressing, and I just thought I'd go through which ones I plumped for. I think there's one still to come. Obviously I don't know which one it is yet. I'll just tell you why these are important non-fiction books to me. Probably because they're reference books. Okay, this is the first, Physics as Metaphor by Roger Jones, Dr. Roger Jones. I shall come back to that because there's a second book paired with it. A Fury for God by Malise Ruthven, I think that's pronounced. So this is one of the best books I've read on Islamic fundamentalism. This was published in 2002. And basically it gets inside the mind of sort of radical fundamentalists in a way that I haven't read in other books, except one which I shall get, which might be quite surprising. So the other one that I spoke of is this, Atta by Cobank. So I have a full review of this, which I'll post the link to. But this is the first Cobank I read. And on the basis of it, I thought he was a serious author. And of course, everything else I've read by him is much more sort of satirical and less literary than this. This is a highly literary book. And again, takes you right inside the mind of Mohammed Atta, who was the ringleader of the 9/11 bombers. But I read this, long before I read that, and on the strength of this work, that I actually wrote one of my novels, which is all about sort of Islamic fundamentalism after the attack in London on the underground. So this is a superb book, highly recommended, and I don't think any of it has sort of got outdated, even though sort of we've moved into the realms of ISIS and things like that, some sort of 17 years after the publication of this book. I think it still holds. So, this is Proust and the Squid, The Story and Science of the Reading Brain by Maryanne Woolf. Again, I've read quite a few books on sort of linguistics, how it works in the brain and reading, because, reading is that strange experience of you read in silence on the whole, but you're sounding the words inside your head at some level when you're reading, and this book sort of speaks to that, and starts off with a brilliant, might even be in the preface rather than in sort of one of the chapters, but she calls it that miracle of communication between two people who are absent from each other, being the reader and the author. Highly recommended. So hopefully there's two books in here. Yeah. Okay. The Shock of the New, Art of the Century of Change, updated and enlarged edition by Robert Hughes, who's Australian. So he made a TV series called The Shock of the New, where I first encountered it, and it was so good. And this is the book of the series, and it's basically everyone, the pop artists and the abstract expressionists. It's got great, cubists, as you can see. It's got great colour plates. I was rather sad when I had to throw my old one away because the mould had got to it. There's Rousseau. Let's go into my more Jackson Pollock, etc., etc. This is just a supremely comprehensive and yet accessible guide to modern art. And this is Six Existentialist Thinkers by H.J. Blackman, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Jaspers, Marcel, Heidegger and Sartre. It was a good introduction to me to people like Heidegger, Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. Sartre I'd already read. Jaspers I have read and cannot remember a thing about it. Marcel is interesting because I can't remember a thing about his philosophy. Gabriel Marcel. Okay, so I might have to reread this. Okay, so the companion book to Physics as Metaphor hasn't come in. That's the one that's still outstanding. So that's called Art and Physics by Leonard Schlain. And that book is a sort of treatise on the relationship of art and scientific breakthroughs, so sort of new movements in art and scientific breakthroughs. And it posits the sort of thesis that art was always ahead of science, that because artists were always thinking about ways of seeing, particularly painters, about ways of seeing and perspective and reality, that a lot of their sort of thought sort of helped form a paradigm in which some of the scientific breakthroughs, particularly Einstein, and you know the fact that time is not fixed, it's relative and all of that. Now that argument I think has been challenged and probably shot down, but it doesn't remove the fact that both scientists and artists are constantly probing the nature of reality and the nature of our senses that interpret that reality. And I think it's a fantastic book. It's you know, some chapters are stronger than others, but even so, if you think about it, you know, even colour itself is really hard to sort of, you know, scientifically prove what colour is. And then this does similar, although not without the art stuff. This is physics as metaphor, that many of the laws and understanding of physics that we have are metaphorical explanations of the maths. So the maths remain sort of abstruse, out there beyond the likes of you and me, the lay people, understanding. So when scientists try and put it into words, it gets metaphorical. And science is actually providing a series of metaphors to explain reality. Does that make it true? Well, the maths may say it's true, that it's, you know, objectively provable and all that, but the words allow a lot more slippage in. And there's a really good section on the in here, an explanation on the notion of a table. You look at a table, and you see you know you can measure it, and it has fixed dimensions. But that's not the case because of the nature of the atoms and subatomic particles that make up that table. It's not a fixed dimension. It's constantly changing. It's constantly in motion. But to our senses and perspectives, it isn't. So those are the two books. So Leonard Schlain, Art and Physics, and this Dr. Roger Jones, Physics as Metaphor. So there you have it. My sort of reference system is not sort of, I can't say it's complete because obviously I lost a lot more books than these, but these are the key texts. So, you know, often I employ metaphors or specific references to painters and paintings, Maryanne, Rothko. I've got a short story where it's all, you know, there's many paintings are referred to. So obviously that's the go-to book for that, because in all honesty I'm not referring back to Tintoretto and Titian and all of those guys, Caravaggio. This and the Leonard Schlain, you know, science is in a lot of my novels. I'm constantly going back to these two books. That's not a specific reference book, that's just sort of laid the foundation of my appreciation of existentialist philosophy. I suppose Heidegger's someone I might go back to and refer to. Nietzsche is quotable, but his whole philosophy as a whole is not something that I look to work into my writing. Proust and the Squid is just, it's not really a reference book anymore, it's just a good read and to help me appreciate what the sort of process of reading involves. And A Fury for God, I wrote the book that you know, that this would form part of the research for. I can't imagine I'd need it for another piece of writing, but I guess you never know. So there you have it. We are now going on a little tour as they get filed. Look at this. I've got my top two shelves that were missing the last time I filmed. So I now have completion in terms of the space afforded me. And this is like sort of smashing a bottle of champagne on onto a ship to launch it. This is very exciting. So the Shock of the New goes in there. Going to struggle to fit some of these in. Physics as metaphor must go in. Okay, I think for now they're just going to have to sort of sit on top. I'm going to have to fiddle around. Reading in the Brain, so again that's in the same sphere as Proust and the Squid. The Body in Sculpture, that's what it says on the tin, so that's sort of related to the Shock of the New, although that does go back into ancient classical Greek and Roman art as well as modern sculpture. Male Fantasies is a fantastic book about the German soldiers from World War One after the war ended, and their sort of their psychological makeup that led them to form the sort of the pre-Nazi groups that were absorbed by the Nazis. And it's just a brilliant psychological treatment, and I urge everyone to read it. There's a second volume of it by this guy called Klaus Theweleit. The second volume isn't nearly as good. You only need to read this one. Jürgen Reich, The Body is Shadow, well, does what it says on the tin. 4 Stages of Greek Thought, that's a very useful sort of potted thing for sort of ancient Greek sort of culture. Galen Strawson, Things That Bother Me, is a great little sort of modern book on philosophy that I reviewed last year, etc, etc. So, thanks very much. Till next time.